Welcome to the Writers Center's virtual craft chat series, where we talk with writers a little less about what they wrote and a little bit more about how they wrote it. My name is Zach Powers. I'm the artistic director of the Writers Center, as well as a novelist and fiction writer, and occasionally a little bit of nonfiction, which I guess is my greatest qualification today to talk to our guest, Harrison Scott Key, who I have known for far too many years at this point, I think. I don't remember our first meeting, but it was, we were both residing in Savannah, Georgia. Harrison's still in Savannah, Georgia. So I don't know how we met, but it's probably like our fourth event together, I think, over the years. So we have real event history at this point. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Zach. It's so great to be here, and it's great to see you and hear you. I hope everybody listening knows what a great guy you are for book events. I think I should say that the first ever public reading I did for anything of mine that ever ended up in a book was at a Seersucker event in Savannah that you put together. That may have been the first time that we met. I'm sure we met before that, but so I feel like our relationship, we've known each other for at least 10 years, more than 10 years. So I definitely appreciate doing this event with you. And I knew that as soon as you left Savannah, wherever you landed, you were going to do something cool and weird with books and writers. So it's really cool to see that you're here and you've got such a great thing going.
Emphasis on the weird, for sure. That's right. So do you have your book handy to read a little bit from?
Yeah, are you going to tell me what you want me to read, or do you?
I am absolutely not going to tell you anything, because that would have required planning, and I did not do that.
Oh gosh, there are so many.
Just doesn't have to be too long. Just sort of like, it's just a taste. So in case someone hasn't read the book yet, they have an idea of what we're chat about. Yeah,
a little taste. Okay.
Something that's completely hilarious and also devastating at the same time, if you have that handy.
Oh, okay, good. I'll read just something short about truth. Writers are in the business of writing truth, whether it's their truth or the truth or a truth. That's a strange word to talk about these days, but it definitely seems to be what all art is after. So I'll read a little bit about that. Okay. Mrs. Pulaski, my high school English teacher, taught me a great lesson about truth. On the first day of school in the 10th grade, when she introduced herself, she said something that stuck with me. After writing her name on the board, she said, "On some days I might look different to you all because I have a condition that causes me to bloat." Mrs. Pulaski was a fantastic teacher, especially cherished in the small public school in Star, Mississippi, where many of the students could hardly read, and those who could often refused to on religious grounds. With authority and feeling, she taught us how to pull apart a sentence and name its parts and instantiate its meaning. I remember Mrs. Pulaski's lessons well. And you know what else I remember? That thing she said about bloating. Why did she tell us that? Because all through high school, that's all we thought about. Is she bloating today, we wondered? No, she looks the same. No, she's totally bloating. Why was she bloating? Was she dying? You don't just go telling a room full of hormone-ravaged clods that you have a condition that causes transmutation. They will eat you alive. But we did not. Why did we love her? She was sparing with praise, spent most of her time explaining how terrible our writing was, how pitifully bereft our minds were of original thoughts, and how these facts in the aggregate represented the imminent decline of world civilization and thus caused further bloating. No, we loved her because she came in, not because she came in with threats or swagger or charm, but because she presented us with the thing that would set us free, truth. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. And everyone, again, How to Stay Married, please get a copy if you don't have one already. So the first, I guess just real quickly in your own words, who the heck are you?
I am probably the most talented writer working in the English language. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, raised in Mississippi. I have been in Savannah, Georgia for about 17 years. I have written 3 books. I have 3 children and a wife. and a dog. And this book that we're talking about is my third book. I've been a working writer. I've been getting paid for writing for, I don't know, I'm 48 now. I've been getting paid to write for about 25 years. I've been an English teacher, a chair of a department, a speech writer, a ghostwriter, a magazine writer, a freelance writer, a movie reviewer, English teacher, writing teacher, just about every kind of thing under the sun. I've done stand-up comedy. I've been a playwright. I've written screenplays. I've just done lots and lots of things. If it involves words and laughter and the occasional gut punch that kind of makes you want to cry and go hug somebody you love, I'm into it. That's the kind of stuff I love to read and love to write. I've got an MFA and a PhD. Please do not hold that against me. Nobody knows that I have a PhD. I've been hiding it for years now, and just
Tell everybody.
I finally come out of the closet and admitted, well, there was a time when I felt that was a liability as a writer to tell people you had all these degrees, because in my experience that what in no rate correlated with talent. Just meant you could write lots and lots and lots of lines and words about words and writing. But I finally come out of the closet and owned up to my graduate degrees, and I'm not ashamed anymore.
That's good. And I will say too that, like, I didn't really plan it, but your books are like right over my shoulder. Your other two right here on my shelf.
Oh, cool.
I tossed Pre-Study across the top for the Thurber Prize winning Savannah, Georgia books. Like that was like my decided, okay, well, and also so I could have a reference point to point to it easily without having to turn around. But so right there, your other two books exist over my shoulder. Apparently, in almost all my chats, I do. So
Savannah has more has the funniest writers per capita in the entire United States, according to the Thurber Award statistics. As you mentioned, Tricia Lockwood's book Pre-Study won the Thurber Prize. My book, I think, won the year before hers, 2015, The World's Largest Man. And I'm a judge. I'm a Thurber judge this year, so I'm about to jump in and start reading some of those books.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for your judgments on the humor of others. So, so you mentioned this a little bit, and I think it's really interesting, and we don't usually get to the career side of writing as much, but I think I'm interested in writing a career with you, in part because your second book, Congratulations, Who Are You Again, is basically the story of your literary career working through this.
Sure.
So you've reflected on literary career more than probably a lot of writers, because you end up writing a whole book about it and the experience of publishing your first book and leading up to that. Broadly, how do you balance like the making of art with the maintenance of writer as job? How are you making art and how are you having a career? Because sometimes those are hard to balance, I think, for a lot of writers.
Yeah. Well, you have to play a lot. You have to have space for play. And, you know, when I have a whole folder on my computer called experiments. It's almost like it's a little research lab where I can just, something I'm just feeling, something weird, something, I heard the phrase, I need to make a little announcement like twice this week. And I couldn't get away from it. The phrase little announcement, or we have a little announcement. And, you know, people say that maybe when they're about to get engaged or they're announcing a pregnancy or something. And so I just opened up a document and I wrote little announcement at the top. And I was like, and I started writing like, I have a little announcement. And I just started writing after that. And I thought, is this like a shouts and murmurs piece? Or is this a poem in like for, you know, poets.org? Like, what is this? I think that's an important part, no matter what your day job is, no matter what, if you have a decently successful career and you're getting invited on podcasts and you've got, you know, your publicist talking to you and you're getting invitations to speak, and you're trying to finish a manuscript, whatever it is, it's important to have space for play and just to experiment. And sometimes too much experimentation you can get stuck in the mud with that, just like anything else. But I've had to remind myself recently that Yeah, writing is so hard, but if you take the fun out of it, if it stops becoming fun, then you really need to get into another line of work, because it is hard. It is the hardest thing I've ever done. But I was working on a project and it was becoming so not fun, and there were no rewards. I wasn't getting, I mean, you get these little hits of dopamine when you write a great sentence, write a great paragraph, have some structural breakthrough, and none of that was happening. And I was like, it's like, why am I working on this stupid idea? This idea is dragging me down and making me a terrible person to be around right now. So I just put it on the shelf and I started working on something else. Just it's play. There's got to be an element of play. If it's just work, then you're doing it wrong. Now it is work and you have to hustle, and you've got to, you want a certain amount of words a day or a certain amount of hours at the desk a day. You've got to have discipline, but it should still be fun. And I'm just remembering that lately, that element of fun has to always be there. I mean, like right now, my publicist is telling me to send him a photo of my wife and me from the first year of our marriage for a story that like Maria Shriver or some person related to the Kennedys is going to publish. So I have to send that, and I have to like talk to my wife who's busy today and get her to look through her Google Photos to send me a photo. And I've got to look through mine. And I'm like, why didn't we do a photo shoot before this book came out? It's about both of us. That's stupid. Like, that's the business side of writing. And I'm like, that's not fun to do, but you've got to do that stuff and tick those boxes. But there's always has to be a safe place, an hour or 2 hours a day where it's just fun. It's just experimenting. Without that, you should be doing something else. At least that's how I feel.
So the second part of like writing as career, and this is probably a question that would have been best if we were hanging out having a beer, but there's 60 people watching, so let's just do it here. So thinking specifically about how to stay married, and there's a forwarding of religion in it. And I've always known that you were a Christian who was a writer. That was never like a secret part of your life. It comes out in previous books. But there is a very strong Christian element to this book. And in some of even the PR, there was Christian humorist, which isn't necessarily the interpretation I would have gone. So I'm just interested how that evolution, is that an evolution of something you were interested in? Is that an evolution of something your publicist was interested in? How do you sort of view your evolution as a writer to this book? And what are you hoping a reader comes away from it with that is maybe detached from the publicity and the terminology associated with it?
Oh man.
I hit you with a hard one right up front. I'm sorry.
All right. I used to hate the words. I love chicken and I love spaghetti, but I hate chicken spaghetti. I don't want those words to be in the same sentence.
Yeah.
And I'm a Christian and I'm funny, but being called a Christian humorist has been the greatest insult of my career. It's like the contest for the world's shortest man. Like, who wants to win that? So yeah, that's weird. A lot of that has to do with marketing. So I do talk a lot. I've talked about religion and sort of wrestling with these ideas, or the ethics or the morals of the zeitgeist. I've written about that in my other books and my other writing. But when you're faced with your wife's infidelity and trying to decide, do I get a divorce or not? What kind of world do I want to make right now for my family? That compelled a lot of religious questions, and I had to wrestle a lot with my past. And so that's in the book. I wouldn't call it a religious book. I wouldn't call it a Christian book, but, and I'm not complaining. So Christianity Today, which is the largest, magazine, like religious magazine in the country, they reviewed the book. And I wasn't mad about that, because a lot of people read that book. A lot of people who do not go to bookstores regularly read Christianity Today. So I thought that was a great way to meet a whole new audience. There's a lot of fucks and shits and goddams in this book. So I thought that would probably turn off a lot of religious people. I didn't really care. It won't turn off. I mean, it wouldn't be a turn off to all the religious people I know and love, but I knew it would turn off some, especially the more staid, conventional, button down, sort of evangelical world. But Christianity Today reviewed the book, and then we did a podcast with them, and that sort of blew up in that part of the reading world. And so now when you look at the Amazon reviews, so many are kind of reviewing it as though it's a Christian book. And then people started sending me photos of the book in the religious inspiration section of Barnes and Noble, which is so weird. Like, this is the weirdest, saddest, funkiest, most irreverent book that has, I'm assuming, ever been in a religious inspiration section. That's weird to me. I definitely think it more belongs in the memoir autobiography section, maybe the marriage and family section of a bookstore. I'm not complaining, because that's just, when I wrote my first book, it was about my father and my relationship with my father, and it was all about Mississippi and hunting and racism and bigotry and all these wild and crazy things that happen in the American South. And then all of a sudden, I was a Southern writer because I wrote about Mississippi. And as I've said elsewhere, like, you get called a Southern writer, like, the next thing you know, you're being invited to do a ribbon cutting at a Cracker Barrel or a Dukes of Hazzard museum. It's weird. But that's
I really hope those are both actual concrete, real examples and not.
I mean, so you just can't. You have to, you can shape what the book becomes in the public consciousness, but it's going to become what it becomes. My next book, I guarantee, I'm really proud of one thing, which is my 3 books are all they're all me. They all sound like me. They're all funny and irreverent, but they all belong in very different categories. And that has been very intentional. I wanted my second book to not be a Southern book at all. I could have written a book about, I don't know, some murder down in a swamp or whatever, true crime. It would have been great. But my second book was nothing like my first. This third book was nothing like my second or my first. And my fourth book, which I'm working on now, which is about a Sasquatch who plays college football. It's called Big Man on Campus. That's nothing at all. You guys think I'm joking. I'm not joking at all.
I know that you're not.
It's about a Sasquatch, and it is the dumbest thing I've ever written, and I'm having so much fun writing something dumb. But there's no, like, I'm really trying to get out of that sort of, I'm a Christian humorist. I'm in that little ghetto right now. But, if it means that there are a bunch of people who are going to read my book who wouldn't have found it otherwise, I'm fine with that. I'm actually been shocked by how many people are not shocked by all of the bad language in the book, how many Christians are not shocked by it. That's actually kind of oddly encouraging.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for answering that question. I think it's a good one to talk about, just so people understand a little bit about where books go in their own life. And once it's published, you don't really have control over what life it takes. I just real quickly on the Sasquatch book. I have a draft of a story that's about a Frisbee dog that saves the world from very small alien flying saucers. and I think it's in the same as you have a UFO over your shoulder in the background. Like, concept of, like, take just this ridiculous thing and run with it. And there's something really joyous about just it's relieving. Like, yes. And I feel like there's so much discovery. You go to that weird place, there's just so much discovery. I mean, do you find yourself, like, even in nonfiction, going to that weird place takes you to revelation and new ideas and new language?
Yeah, it should be, at least for me, I have a full-time job. I'm a dean at a university. I have 3 teenage daughters. I have a lot of responsibility and heaviness in my life. A lot of things to watch out for. I have to take care of my mother, who's getting older. She lives down the street. I got a lot going on. And so I think, for me, writing has to be fun and playful and exciting. It can't be too heavy. Even this book that we're talking about, How to Stay Married, that's a heavy book, but, like, I'm having fun with words and sentences and laughter. And the same way with this Bigfoot story, or I love your dog with the Frisbees. I'm not out here trying to win a Booker Prize. I'm not out here trying to earn tenure at an Ivy League university. I want books that are so joyful and exciting and weird that people cannot wait to pick them up. I'm rereading all the books and novels of Charles Portis right now, who's my favorite American writer. Charles Portis, love that guy. He died a couple years ago, and there's a new Library of America collection of all of his novels. He's the guy who wrote True Grit, for those of you who are listening, but he mostly writes comic novels that do not happen in the Old West. I cannot wait to open up his books right now. Like, I'm so excited about what weird thing is he going to say next. It fills the air around me with electricity when I open up his books, and I want to do that for other people. And that's why I love your writing, because it's so weird and just like never quite know what's going to happen. Like, it doesn't take itself too seriously, and then like profundity happens in that space. George Saunders is the master at that. Mark Twain did that really well. But anyway, so yeah, I'm all about like letting wonder and curiosity and joy. I mean, dude, my brother's a farmer. All right. Every day he's got to go out and make sure they're getting rain, make sure that bugs or wildlife aren't eating all the crops. Like, it's pretty heavy stuff, and that's all he does. And I have a little bit of my day where I get to just kind of dream and be weird and go into outer space, and I'm gonna enjoy that and revel in it.
Yeah, I mean, mentioning the rereading these books and finding joy. Like, I've been itching for. I know this seems like a heavy tone, but Moby Dick, which I think is one of the most joyful books ever written, and I'm just itching. Like, I think August might be a Moby Dick month. I might just pull it back off the shelf. I've read bits and I read it bits and pieces since I originally read it, but like, do I just want to read the whole thing again? And hear this guy be really excited about whale anatomy, because no one's ever been excited about anything as he is excited about whale anatomy. So
I mean, can you imagine he's sitting in a bar talking about, they're like, what are you working on, buddy? And he's like, it's going to be an epic novel about a like whale hunting, whale fishing. I mean, that was like the 19th century version of it's a Sasquatch novel. Yep. People were like, really? Like, that so many people gave him hell about writing some boring book about whaling, but it's become like the greatest American novel, and for that same reason, it just ripples with energy out of it, and it's very comical. That's a very funny book. I mean, it gets into like crazy weird detail that you have, like, if you're not having fun reading it, you're doing it wrong.
And there's like the Queequeg scene is like the original American bromance, to borrow Christopher Baronato's interpretation, our mutual friend Chris. That was his interpretation of like, yeah, you're right. I think this might have been, need to do some research to confirm it, but I think that's a good hypothesis, at least.
Totally.
Yeah. I do have, I want to get a little bit into craft here. And comedy as craft, because you don't get a lot of people who identify as humorists. And I do believe you have that identity to you. So I want to talk about comedy as craft. And in your second book, which I referenced before, you admit that it took a lot of time and a lot of writing before you figured out what you were doing in terms of being funny on the page, turning your natural sense of humor into something that became a written sense of humor.
Yes.
So how do you take that natural sense of humor that you do have and you make that funny in writing, when you make the page funny? What's the difference, in other words, maybe between a one-liner at a cocktail party and literary humor?
Oh gosh, man, that's the question. I don't know, man. Like, I want every line or every paragraph. What Neil Simon used to write, the great playwright who passed away, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago. And he used to write for TV. He and like Woody Allen and that whole crew, like back in the like late 50s, early 60s, they wrote for TV, Sid Caesar, all that. But they said like 3 jokes a page. You had to write 3 jokes a page. And that seems kind of, formulaic and a little rigid, but I feel that way when I write too. I want a lot happening. I want 1 or 2, 3, maybe 3 laughs per page. Not for their own sake, but because it creates a kind of, if you go, if you're down in the Bahamas, if you're in Jamaica and you're going out for dinner and the band is playing, you want like 2 out of 3 songs to be danceable, because you're there on vacation and you want to get down and you want to get groovy and you want to dance. You want to do some shots of rum, drink some Red Stripe and go dance. And that's how I feel about my writing and about books that I love. I want there to be dancing on every page. And for me, comedy the best way to get that. But there's so many different kinds. I mean, there's the comedy of incongruity where you just have the fish out of water. You've got a character who doesn't quite know what he's doing. Well, let me tell you, I'm working on a story right now. I'm a magazine story about an experience I had recently, and it's not all funny. Well, I'll tell you what it is. I basically took like a 2,000-mile trip on Amtrak, and I'm writing a story about it. And there are a lot of ways to start it, but I thought it would be really funny to start the whole story when I'm in the shower on the train. I mean, we're going 80 miles an hour and I'm trying to shower, and I have never so desperately been thankful for like a handlebar in a shower. And I'm like really having to hold on to the handlebar because I'm lurching. This thing is throwing me around. I got soap in my eyes. That's a funny scene because you have somebody who doesn't quite know what's going on and is out of control and can't control his situation. So I thought I would open up with that. I'm like, that's a really funny way to open up this story about being on a train. I mean, when you're being funny in real life, it's just all verbal irony. I mean, you're just being funny verbally. You say something funny, I say something funny back. I don't know, maybe I just got in a car accident and it's like a scene out of a TV show. I just got in a car accident and you're my friend and you drive up alongside of us and you roll down the window and you go, "Hey man, how's it going?" And I go, "It's going great, buddy." Like, that's verbal irony. That's how most comedy happens in real life, just people talking. But in writing, of course, there's a lot of verbal irony in dialogue. That's all comedy is in dialogue, is verbal irony. But just funny situations, interesting descriptions, exaggeration, hyperbole, or understatement. Usually when I'm working on a story, and this is like a nonfiction story, I'll write down all the facts and the things, and then I'll open up a page and I'll say, what is funny about this? Meaning, like, where's the energy going to come from? Where's the nuclear fission going to happen in this story? And I'll make a list of everything funny that I remember if I was telling this story to my friends. And then I'm like, all right, well, when I'm writing this story, I got to make sure I hit all those beats because that's the funny stuff. I don't know, that's kind of a rambling answer, but writing comedy is so much harder than just being funny, like in your daily life.
You mentioned, I think, some of the larger scale stuff in there, and that's and I definitely see exactly what you're talking about in your writing. I think, though, there's also a language level humor.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yes.
talking about humor and language level, like the phrase that stuck out was flaccid bacon. I that was in there somewhere and I jotted it down. So at some point in this book, there's the phrase flaccid bacon. And I like, how do you think of humor on like a language level, on a word to word level, and what you're looking for there?
Surprise is a key to humor, right? Surprising the reader. And often you choose the unexpected word can just elicit, it just creates more sparkle. There's just more energy there. Maybe it's a laugh, maybe it's not a laugh, but like coming up with an interesting, let me think of a sentence. I was writing a sentence recently. I mean, again, I'm reading all this Charles Portis, so I've got him on the brain, but he's so good at give me a normal sentence, like, he took the watch and put it on his wrist, right? Perfectly normal, factual description. He took the watch and put it on his wrist. But he slapped the watch onto his wrist. Now, that's not funny, but that's an interesting verb. He slapped the watch onto his wrist. You can see more what's happening. There's a emotion to it. And so writing funny is getting your language to be interesting and rich and chunky and full of nutrients is about choosing the word that's interesting. Now, if you choose it too hard, it gets precious and weird. Like, you can tell when the writer has got the thesaurus open, when they're just choosing words that feel different. But here's the deal. I got the thesaurus open all the time. I'm just trying to choose the word that is just familiar enough not to be weird, but just weird enough to be weird. Like, instead of I don't know. I can't give you an example right now, but
I think flaccid bacon is a good example of that, limp or soggy or something else.
uncooked bacon, like
Yeah, uncooked
flaccid
bacon.
bacon is uncooked.
Yeah.
But obviously, when you hear the word flaccid, you usually think of the penis.
Yes.
It's got this, it's carrying this little, it's got this charge, this kind of charge of the what's the word? Taboo, a little bit there. Flaccid bacon. It's also, the word flaccid sounds like bacon that's just sort of hanging. When I hear flaccid, like when I hear uncooked bacon, I'm sorry that we're getting so weird about bacon, but when I hear uncooked bacon, I'm just seeing like bacon on a plate that's kind of pale and uncooked. But when I hear flaccid bacon, it's like hanging off of something. And it's that much more real to my brain. So I'm all about choosing the interesting word, the more nutritious word.
And also it's a good, and this is something I think you do regularly, is also the connotation of a word being slightly at odds with the use of the word, and playing with connotation versus denotation and all that stuff. And again, that's all over the humor that you write too, I think.
Yeah, nobody wants to think about penises when they're eating bacon. Probably, I don't know, maybe some people do. But like putting that word next to bacon, and all of a sudden, like, good bacon is crispy. I mean, it's just, there's a lot going on there, and you're not thinking about that as you read. But there's a part of your brain that when it comes across those two words, like it sparks up. There's something interesting is going on. And when I read something like that, I'm like, okay, I'm in the hands of somebody I'm a magician who's doing magic tricks as I go, and I'm fascinated by that.
Well, we somehow didn't lose all our audience during that conversation. So I'm going to go on to the audience questions from the chat now to save them for my questions for the rest of this event, hopefully. So obviously the book is very personal. Did you have any qualms about airing your personal business, and did your family have any qualms about it? And what's that process like?
Yeah, that's the number one question you get asked when you write autobiographical nonfiction is, how does your family feel about this? No matter what book it is. I've gotten asked that tons and tons on every book tour I've done, but especially this one, because I'm revealing really raw and intimate details of my marriage. So the short answer is, when I wrote this manuscript, first of all, everybody that we love and care about, they knew this story as it was happening. So even our children, because, when my wife left, like, she sat our children down and told them she was leaving. Like, there's nothing in this book that was going to shock anybody that we truly care about and see on a daily basis or spend Thanksgiving with. So there were no secrets, bombshell secrets coming out in this book. Even though it's a bombshell to other people, it wasn't to us. All of our people knew this story. But when I wrote this manuscript, yeah, I definitely had reservations. I still have reservations about it, but I felt it was a story that needed to be told. Men don't write about being betrayed. Men don't write about adultery. There are a lot of marriage books, and they're all kind of anodyne and not as graphic as marriage is. And I was like, the world needs a book like this. So when I finished the manuscript, I handed it to my wife, and I said, if you don't love this book, I will burn it. If you don't love this book, because I knew that she had to be fully on board. And she took it and she read it, and she came back and she said she was shocked at how angry and resentful that it wasn't. She thought it would be, because it was about she thought it would be like scorched earth, because she had an affair twice with my neighbor, for anybody listening, who had been one of my best friends. And so she was shocked at how angry it wasn't. She said it was actually really funny, and she was shocked at that. And she said, it's only missing one thing. And I said, what? And she said, I want to write something for it too. And I was hoping she would ask that. And so she went away and she wrote a really, really beautiful chapter. And it was really frustrating because it did not take a lot of editing. It was so good. I'm like, you should be writing books more often, because I've been doing it for years, and she just made it look so easy. But I think this is one of those stories that was just sort of has been kind of needing to come out of her for many years. So she was kind of ready to write it. and we sat our children down, and they've been through the process of books, and I've written about my children and their births and potty training, and so my kids are used to dad writing their stories and me signing books and autographs at bookstores and get people taking my photo at a restaurant. Like they're used to that. But we did sit them down and say, hey, remember when your mom moved out and then she came back? And she told our daughters that she had been having an affair with our neighbor. Like, she came clean with them, and they're in therapy now too. But they're amazing. They're awesome kids. But we said, hey, remember when all that happened a few years ago? Like, well, I wrote a book about it. And Lauren was like, yeah, like, we have this book coming out, and we want y'all to be prepared if one of your friends' moms reads the book and tells your friend and talks to you about it at school. Like, we want you to be ready for that. So we've kind of prepared them, and they've had some sessions with our marriage therapist, and he's been really great, just kind of making sure that they're kind of digesting it all in a healthy way. So yeah, it's been weird, but that's how you do it. You got to do a lot of cultivating of the earth before the book comes out, to make sure the right people know what's going on with the book.
Thank you. Back to the chat window. Did you choose your audience based on who you knew it'd be most marketable to, or did you just write from the heart and whoever reads it? And I might just throw in generally, how do you consider audience in sort of?
Yeah. Well, definitely for the question, the answer is B, as I was mentioning a little earlier. Not really thinking about, I very intentionally did not want this to be a Christian book for Christian audiences and sold at Christian bookstores. That's not the kind of writer I am, and I just don't want to be ghettoized like that. I teach and work in higher education, not in a religious institution, and I teach and work in a secular institution. If you're religious, you might call it that. An art school called SCAD, and I've worked in non-sectarian higher ed for my entire career. I play in a band that, plays at bars where you can still smoke inside. Like, I'm just not that guy. I don't want to write that kind of book.
Oh, Tybee Island.
Yeah, docs. But I did have to think, like, okay, like after I just wrote the book, I'm just writing from the heart, and I'm trying to keep the tent. And I believe this politically and in a literary sense. I want the tent to be as big as possible to fit as many people as possible. I don't want to alienate a single reader. When you write funny, you are going to alienate a few people because you're going to offend somebody, and that's fine. But I want to keep the tent big and wide open. I mean, in the first chapter, I talk about how I am going to talk about religion in this book, and then I make fun of religion and talk about how stupid it is. And then I talk about how stupid my non-religious friends are too. Like, I'm trying to offend everybody equally to keep the tent as big as possible. However, when I finally sit down with the editor and the book is done and approved, and I sit with the publicist and my agent, there are a lot of conversations about how this book should be positioned and marketed. And once that behemoth sort of takes over your book, you just got to hold on and ride and go with it. I've done the most salacious podcast interviews you can imagine, like podcast interviews where it's almost X-rated, the kind of questions I'm being asked. And I've done podcast interviews with like pastors and Christian magazines. That is so weird, man. That is so freaking weird. But I stay in touch with my publicist, and he's like, we think you should do this one, but we also think you should do this one. And so right now I'm just kind of in all of these different worlds, and it's fine. I mean, as long as people are reading the book and telling others about it, I don't really care who reads it.
Yeah. Back to the chat window, a quick question. The stories and novels of the late Mississippi novelist Barry Hannah contain much humor, even in his dark novels. What do you think of Barry Hannah's work?
Oh, I love Barry Hannah. Man, he was a weirdo. Golly. There were tons of bumper stickers. You could see these in Mississippi in the 90s that said, I'd rather be reading airships which is one of his books. Mississippi is a strange place. I like to tell people that Mississippi has perfected everything beautiful and everything tragic about America. Like Mississippi has perfected it, whether it's literature or music or bigotry and racism. Like we are good at all of that, even when we shouldn't be. I love Mississippi. It was an amazing place, amazing sort of nursery for a young writer, because the stories are, if you read my first book, you'll feel it. Like the stories are so wild. The things that I did as a kid, the work, the things that I saw on the hog farm and the things I saw on the ranch and at the deer camp, just wild stuff. And as sort of backwards as so much of Mississippi is, because of that sort of spiritual profundity and depth that you have in a lot of the American South, as Flannery O'Connor calls it, it's this like God haunted, like Jesus haunted world. So there feels like there's a very obvious spiritual dimension to everything that's going on, whether it's Satan or Jesus and love and light. There's a lot of darkness and a lot of light happening in the parts of the world where I grew up. And so reading Barry Hannah was so affirming as a college student, because he was writing about places I had been and walked. I mean, of course, Faulkner was, and Welty was, and Tennessee Williams was, but like Barry Hannah was so new and a contemporary. And so him writing about, his character in Geronimo Rex playing the saxophone at a bar, in downtown Jackson near the fairgrounds. Like, I mean, that was my experience as a young boy in Mississippi. So it was awesome. I love Barry Hannah. I mean, he is a total weirdo.
Great. Back to the chat window. I believe this question is referring back to when you said you have like 3 jokes or you try to have 3 laughs or 3 jokes per page. So it had that ratio. Do you think there are similar ratios or events per page with other things in writing besides humor? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, let me say this. Obviously, there are lots of there are like even in this last book, especially, which is so heavy. There are probably many spans of pages where there isn't much of a joke because it's so heavy. But when I say joke, I mean just like I'm looking for a certain kind of energy, a little, what George Saunders says, like a little gas station that kind of scoots the story along a little bit faster. I do think that if I wasn't a funny writer, if I was just a regular writer, I'd still be looking for, like, there are times when I'll take a highlighter, I'll print out a story, and I'll just circle things that feel nutritious. They feel like, oh, wow, big themes happening here, or this is a really profound statement, or I love this weird wordplay happening, and I'll just highlight that. And I want to see some of those highlights on every page, because I want to know that there's a lot. If you're making I don't know, potato soup, and you're doling it out in all these bowls, you want there to be some chunks, man, in every bowl. You don't want one bowl to have all the chunks and all 3 other bowls here that are just broth, right? You want to spread out the good meaty stuff and on every page and every bowl. And so, yeah, I think as a writer, you just have to decide what you want that to be. Is that poetry? Is it metaphor? Is it good dialogue? I mean, I'll write a whole chapter and be like, holy crap, I forgot to put dialogue in here. And then I'll have to go back and add some dialogue. And so if you struggle with writing dialogue, then try to make sure that you've got a little bit of dialogue on every page. I mean, just whatever you need as a writer. I do think it can seem formulaic and too sort of type A, but writing is so chaotic and playful and experimental that sometimes you need to let your editorial side sort of come into the room and say, you know what, we need a little more comedy here, here, and here, or a little more poetry here, here, and here.
Back to the chat window. I think one of the most intriguing things about your writing is the humor layered with depth and meaning. I want to ask, quote, how do you do that? But maybe I'm trying to ask, how do you think about deep humor and deep meaning simultaneously?
Oh, yeah. Well, when I started out writing, it was very shallow. Because humor is really hard to do. And I mean, it's just hard to do on the page. It's hard to write something that makes people go, huh, that's funny, or actually laugh. And I was mistaken about humor when I was a younger writer. When I say younger, I mean like in my 20s. I really thought of jokes as they were just light and funny and silly and not meaningful. And it wasn't until I hit my 30s when I was writing my first book that I really understood that there's really a lot of pain behind humor. That's kind of a truism, the sad clown theory of comedy. Everybody, comedians are really sad inside. It's kind of a truism and a cliche, but it's really a profound thought. And I believe that all comedy is rooted in sorrow of one kind or another. It could be a sorrow that the world is just effed up and broken. Things don't work right. Or it could be deep sorrow at personal loss. It could be lots of different things. But it took me a while to realize that I could make jokes, puns, funny dialogue, whatever. There's a lot of funny redneck dialogue in my first book that's just funny because that's how rednecks talk. It's funny. But for me, I realized that like the line between laughter and sadness, laughter and crying is so thin. And that so much of my humor over the years and my gift for comedy comes from deep sorrow at not feeling like I didn't fit into the world. And so being able to access that in a story is very powerful. I love it. I love a moment in a silly comedy where I almost cry. And I'll give you two examples. In the Royal Tenenbaums, when Royal dies and they have the BB gun salute at the cemetery, that's so sad and beautiful. Like, it's funny. BB gun salute, like, that's ridiculous. But you see how much his family loves him when they give him that BB gun salute. It was something so I remember weeping when that happened. And in Dumb and Dumber, the world's absolutely dumbest movie of all time, the scene where Harry and Lloyd, I think it's Harry and Lloyd, the scene where they reunite after they sort of kind of break up as friends, and they reunite and they get on the scooter and they ride off to Colorado or something. That's such a sweet, sweet, tender moment. And I love that. That's where my heart swells when I'm watching a movie. And so I'm trying to do that when I'm writing. And sometimes the laughter makes the heart swell even bigger.
And the Royal Tenenbaums, another Savannah connection named after the Tenenbaum family of Savannah. So
that's right.
Yeah. In the chat, how did you get started as a writer?
I just got that question yesterday. That's a hard question. I really highly recommend, if you're a writer, check out my second book, Congratulations, Who Are You Again? It sort of answers that question in full. I sort of gradually realized I was a writer over many, many years. I never sought that out as a career. I always thought I was supposed to be like a preacher or an attorney or work for the FBI or something responsible.
All three at once.
Yeah, I was never good with blood and gore at the deer camp, so I knew that working in medicine was out. But I always thought I was good with words. I could write well. I could speak well. So I always thought I should go into something where I was writing and speaking, like law. I really thought I would be a preacher for a short time as a kid. But I was always writing. I wrote on my mom's electric typewriter. I wrote in my free time. I wrote, high school, like I was a redneck high school kid in the middle of the country. And all I was doing all day long was reading or like writing letters to my friends, to my grandparents. Like I just wrote all the time. And then when I got to college, it was the same way. I studied philosophy, so there's a lot of writing papers and stuff, but I did not think I was a writer. I did not study English or anything like that. But I looked up at one point in my early 20s and I was like, I think I'm a writer because all I do is write. That's just all. I'm writing letters, I'm writing papers, all I'm doing is reading. And so it took me a long time to realize I was a writer. And then once I realized, it took me another 5 or 10 years to actually get paid to do it. But I so deeply love just sitting at the desk and trying to put a sentence together and tell a story and say something that's on my mind. I love it so much, but it took me forever to realize that I was a writer.
From the chat window, so would you say that writing with humor is cathartic?
Oh yeah, I think all writing is cathartic, but definitely, definitely, I love to make people laugh. Writing and writers and literature can be so serious and take itself so seriously. But what I love about comedy is that when people laugh, something true has been said. Maybe hurtful, maybe not, but something true has been said. Like laughter is like a Geiger counter for radioactive truth. And so I love comedy and I love funny stuff, because if you find yourself laughing at a stand-up comic, at your friend that you work with, or at a book, you have encountered something true whenever you laugh. You're acknowledging, maybe you're acknowledging that a truth that everybody knows, but nobody says. But that's why I love comedy, because it does seem to acknowledge hidden truths. And that's what we're all in search of, man. I mean, whether you're going to church or whether you got a bookshelf full of crystals and tarot cards, we're all just looking for truth. We're looking for the meaning behind the meaning. We're looking for the truth behind the veil. All of us, that we call it spiritual truth or eternal truth or the deep truth, whatever it is, man. QAnon, I don't care what, everybody's looking for the secret behind the thing that they can see. And comedy is, for me, that's the skeleton key, because when you hear comedy, that's truth, man. And you better circle around that thing, because there's something there that's worth thinking about. I love it. I feel very blessed to be able to write funny stuff, and I feel very lucky that people laugh at it.
I'd like to throw in one kind of hard craft of writing question here right at the end, which is, how do you take, in a memoir, how do you take these things that happened and turn them into a narrative? Because just if you just wrote linearly everything that happened, you don't have a story.
Yeah.
Something else. So how do you figure out what the story is in the real things you're drawing from, either in an essay or a whole book?
Oh man, that's a tough question. That is the question. Definitely don't do it in a linear fashion, as you said. I'll go crafty and just tell you how I do it, how I've learned to do it now. So first of all, one thing I tell my students is, if there's a story that you have found yourself telling a lot over the years, like the story of the time you got in trouble at summer camp for skinny dipping, or the story of the time that you helped your cousin steal a car, or whatever story that you come back to, that you tell people when you're sitting around a campfire or you're sitting on a front porch, there is something there in that story that wants to be told. There is some truth about who you are and what you think the world is in that story. So for me, the way I wrote my first book was, I was really struggling with what to write. Should it be a novel? Should it be a memoir? Should it be funny? Should it be not? And I was talking to one of my friends, and she said, I don't care what you write, Harrison, as long as it's funny as those stories you used to tell about your dad. And I was like, oh, maybe that's it. And I realized I've been telling stories about my dad my whole life, very specific stories. And I was like, maybe my heart is trying to tell me something. Maybe there's a reason I'm telling those stories, because I'm trying to come up with what it means. Something about telling those stories makes me feel like I'm explaining who I am to the person I'm telling it to. So that's my first bit of advice, is whatever stories you come back to and you tell a lot over the years, your memoir is somewhere in those stories. The second thing I do, or the second advice, is when I'm writing about a story, real quick, when I was 17 years old, just graduated from high school, I worked at a golf course, and I accidentally got everybody fired from the golf course, except myself. They kept me because through no fault of my own, I did something that accidentally caused a drug ring to be exposed at the golf course, run by all the people who work there. I was the only person they did not sell or give drugs to, which is why I didn't get fired. I've always wanted to tell this story because it just seems so kind of weird and wacky and like meatballsy, kind of like this weird summer job story about everybody who got fired. And I've never written that story. I still haven't written it, but it's always been there when I'm like trying to think of like, all right, what am I going to write about next? What book am I going to write next? I always come up with the golf course story. Now, when it's time to write that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down everything I remember about that summer. And probably most of it's going to be in chronological order, but I'm just going to write down on a bulleted piece of paper everything I remember. If I'm lucky, the more I write down, the more I will remember. And pretty soon I'll have 2, 3, even 4 pages of just raw fact memories. And then I'll start to think about, well, what's the arc of the story? Like, how does it begin? Is it linear? Does it start with my first day on the job, or does it start at the end when everybody got fired, or does it, and then, so I'll try to come up with some sort of arc to this. And once you have the arc, the stuff that doesn't matter from all those lists of facts will start to sort of fade away into the background. But a real story is about how you changed, what happened, and how did it change who you were. So there's a reason I have always wanted to write the golf course story. But guys, I don't know what that reason is yet. I won't really know until I sit down and start to write it. Why is this story asking me to write it? Is it because of my experience with drugs? I used to be a teetotaler. I didn't touch drugs or alcohol and became a total dope and alcohol fiend like 2 years after this happened. Is it because, I don't know why I keep wanting to tell the story, but that's the question. So how did it change me? How did this story change me? How was I different at the end of the summer than I was at the beginning of the summer? And that's the story. The facts, as Vivian Gornick says, the facts of the story are just the occasion. That's just the scene. That's the setting. The story is how you changed on the inside. What's different about you? So maybe it was because I was 17 and about to leave home. Maybe this is a story about growing up and like becoming a independent person in the world, having my own job.
Becoming a narc.
Becoming a narc. Maybe it's a story about I had so much freedom when I worked on the golf course, and I used to listen to Ziggy Stardust and Elvis at the Intercontinental Hotel. I had these 2 awesome tapes I listened to, and I love the freedom of that job. There's so many ways I could tackle that story, but I have to decide, how was I different at the end? And then that's the story arc. So then all these facts that you line up, the ones that don't matter sort of fall into the background. And then I start building a story off of that. I hope that helps.
No, that was great. And I think it's also a great point to call it an evening. So Harrison, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you and talk to you some too. I have seen you recently. I was at your book release event, happened to be in Savannah for that, but it's nice to see you up close virtually and in person and talk to you again. And have to catch up next time we're down in the Deep South.
Dude, I'm so proud of you and all the stuff you're doing up there and all these people who are listening because of what y'all are doing at the Writers Center. Thank you, everybody listening, for caring about beautiful things and for, I'm assuming, making a lot of beautiful things, because I'm sure you're all writers and teachers and deep readers. So so happy to meet everybody and talk to everybody. Thank you.
And everyone, get the book if you can, and we'll see you all next time. Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.